All right, welcome back. Episode 1. I don't know what episode is this, but we're doing another one of these chats.
Maybe welcome
And
back if they haven't seen this before. Like we had episode 0. We had like the pre-pilot, so it's like welcome back.
they're
This is what
back to
they're
the
seeing.
beginning. It's like Back to
Yes.
the Future, except the opposite.
Yeah.
So it's good. So here we are. We're talking about NLP, hypnosis, personal growth, spirituality. I don't know. We'll talk about a lot of stuff in this episode. We're going to wander. But I thought we'd kick it off with a bizarre question that I posed to my Facebook the other day. We can even reject the question. But the question is, hypothetically, if you wanted to compete for most mentally healthy person alive, how would you go about training? Now, when I asked this on my Facebook, a lot of people were like, well, I mean, that's just absurd of a question. Well, that's the point, right? It's a hypothetical question. But I think what came up for people was like, well, like if you were saying you're the most mentally healthy person alive, then you're actually a narcissist and you're a terrible person and these sorts of things, which I just thought was kind of interesting right off the bat, because like if you said, I won the world's strongest man competition in 2020, people wouldn't be like, what a narcissist. You think you're the strongest person alive? Like
Well, I just proved it when I lifted a
Yeah,
truck.
there was a competition. There was judges.
right?
There was
There's a
other.
competition. There were judges. There were events, right? Like, but mental health is like something you can't prove, or you can't like show it off to somebody else. Uh, but you know, what even is this thing? What is it to be mentally healthy? Like we have a lot of, you know, criteria for mental illness in the, you know, in the DSM-5 or whatever, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. But yeah, I remember Steve Andreas saying like the DSM has all these mental disorders, but not a single like treatment in the whole book. It's this huge
Yeah.
book. Not a single like, here's what you do for this. And I think mental health, or like, you know, what is that? It's kind of like vague compared to how well we've defined mental illness down to like the specific details. Like, does it mean just feeling happy? Does it mean like having a meaningful life, or deep relationships, or a spiritual connection, or all of the above, or none of the above? Or like, where would you even start with that?
Well, you know, I think depending on the question you ask, you get different answers. And in the book, I think it was The Frogs and Princes, it talks about how like the biggest problem that Bandler had with what he was studying in psychology is all the focus on the questions basically being, you know, where do illnesses come from and what are we basically going to call those illnesses, right? Like,
Right.
why do people have problems and what are we going to label those problems? And if that was the question, you're right, they're not actually studying what actually works. I asked a similar question, not if you were to compete, but I asked much more simpler question to, I think some of your, I think David, you're familiar with Dr. David Murphy. He's in the MMHA group. I consider him a friend and a mentor. And he has a very long career in medicine, as a psychotherapist, as a gynecologist, as a pediatrician at one point as well. The question I asked is, what is good mental health? Much simpler.
Hmm.
And I really liked his answer, which was simply, it depends on the person you're asking. It's up to them to determine.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, there's a sense that's true even of physical strength, right? Like a world's strongest man competition is a very different competition than a powerlifting competition. There's different events and different things. And you could say, well, that's not strength. Gymnastics is strength. Or you could say, well, that's not strength. Like being able to do a 100-mile bike ride is strength. I might call that endurance, but someone could use the word strength. So I think that's true even in the physical. But certainly, I think once we get into mental health, we really go into like, well, what are your values? What are your goals? What matters to you? And it gets really personal.
I have a comment on that. I've been following Mike Isertel, who is he's a doctor. If you've ever seen Dr. Mike Isertel, his stuff is hilarious. And but he was saying how he overhead pressed 287 pounds or something like that for like 8 or 10 reps, which is ridiculous. It's insane. And he's like, yeah, I was really strong. And it wasn't like a brag. It was just like, by that metric, I'm really strong. And that struck me that you don't have to be like, there's no doubt, like anyone, even like the strongest man in the world would be like, yeah, that's a pretty strong lift. Point being, I think that if you have criteria for what is strength for whatever arena, whether it's gymnastics or power man or Olympic lifting, like those are all strong, but they're different criteria, and you can accept those. And, oh yeah, you're strong if you can do this lift for this amount with this body weight, and like yeah, that's agreed upon.
Right.
With mental health, I had the same thought or similar thought that mental health is kind of like how you are you happy with it. Like if you were, there's nothing saying if someone was borderline personality with schizophrenia, but they were happy with it. There's nothing saying they weren't mentally unhealthy, except for any consequences for that diagnosis or that way of thinking. The reason they're not mentally healthy is because typically, like they do things and act in ways that their life self destructs. Like there are things that happen that make them, oh yeah, this is not a healthy way of being. But for like as far as what would make you mentally well, I think it'd be doing things that would lead you to be happy with your existence, or at least be at peace with it, or something along those lines. And I
Right.
think I tend to go to like the core states, like if you have a state of oneness or peace or nirvana, or a state of being zen or happy or content. Yeah, if you have something that you're like, yeah, I'm good. Um, I think a lot of you get like enlightenment is like one way of getting there. That's one definition. But I think it does depend. Like for some people, being mentally well is you get up at 4 in the morning, and you run for 2 hours straight, and you do push-ups till you can't move your arms. For some people, it's you get up and have like a cup of tea, and you ease into the day, and you focus on what do I really want out of life, or something else.
Right. Yeah. Well, you bring up some good points around just like kind of doing what you want to be doing and being okay with it, and then maybe having some transpersonal core states, as we call them in core transformation, states of beingness, peace. For a lot of people, those might sound very abstract, though, because
Yeah.
those are nice sounding things. Yeah, peace, contentment, oneness. Yeah, how do I get those? The funny thing is there are techniques to get that in
Yeah.
hypnosis and neurolinguistic programming, and of course in meditation traditions and so on. So yeah, there might be something to that. Uh, it makes me wonder, though. I think you brought this up, David, but it makes me wonder, like someone who's happy with their behavior, but it's like causing harm to themselves or others, but maybe they can't see it. Like someone who's in denial. I don't know, like cluster B personality disorders, narcissistic personality. I think borderline might fit there. I don't know. I'm not a psychiatrist, but the sorts of things that I think it's called ego syntonic versus ego dystonic. Anyway, one of those is like it causes me suffering. My suffering causes me suffering. Another one is like I'm fine with it. But you guys are the problem,
Right.
and I'm going to cause you suffering, and I'm okay with it. Sort of the narcissist. So I think we'd want to say that that still isn't where we're looking for, but something that like is good for me and it's good for the people around me. You know, and it's in line with my values, but it's also in line with a reasonable set of values in my shared community or something like that. At least it doesn't cause direct harm to people. So yeah, I think those states of peace, love, joy, whatever you want to call them, those are probably good candidates for that, rather than like as long as I'm controlling everyone around me, I'm happy. Something like
And
that.
that would depend too. If you're someone who does have that worldview, then you would say, well, that is part of being healthy, is that I'm able to dominate people that are my sphere of influence.
Right.
But I think for most people, and like if you look at a societal view, we have to have some sort of we have to work together. There's got to be something that makes us not just all out for each other, or else anarchy, ensues, and then you don't have any structure. So it would
Right.
harm more people. Society wouldn't work.
Yeah.
So I think for some people, if you are like a narcissist, maybe your definition is different. But I think for a more global view, then I think then yeah, something that's peaceful or harmonious with other people is going to be that's going to be the key.
Yeah. Certainly from the outside, I think we can see that highly selfish, controlling people are causing misery for lots of other people. While you're if you're that person, maybe it's harder to see, but
Oh,
from
it's
the
great.
outside, it's pretty obvious, right? Uh, so I don't think that's going to fit in our definition of mental health, even if it's congruent with your own values. So it's sort of congruent with your own values and good for other people. I
One
think
thing
would
I
be
want to
important.
just bring attention to, like, I noticed, David, you naturally sort of change the word from mental health to mental wellness, right? And I think that, again, depending on the question you ask, you're going to get a different answer,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
This is something I actually do as well. I get invited quite a bit to give talks on mental health, but I actually always have them change the the topic. That, no, I'm not going to talk about mental health. I'm going to talk about mental wellness, or the other term that I actually like using even more is mental fitness, right? Because
Hmm.
there's a sort of an action, something that you can do. And since NLP is really about doing, and hypnosis is really about doing and state control, and kind of being in the driver's seat of life, I just personally like that terminology. So it's this thing about, let's define this, just because mental health has kind of been taken over by another industry, and it's always like mental health issues, right?
Yeah.
Um, so
Right.
so I just wanted to kind of bring sort of attention to that.
So,
That
what
you
would
did.
you say is the difference between mental health and mental wellness or fitness?
Well, I think every single talk, I'm taking the definition on how it's being used already. So every single talk about mental health is always like, this is what anxiety looks like. This is what depression looks like.
So, it's
This is
problem
what,
focused.
yeah. So it's all about the definition of something that's bad. Whereas if you change the paradigm to mental wellness, well, now it's like, it's kind of like, um, I got this from the nutritionist folks that my wife's a nutritionist, so like really her crowd. But they have this wonderful thing that, like the best case scenario of a doctor, for example, is someone that is not sick, right? Because no one goes to their doctor and says, "I'm perfectly fine, but I want to be in optimal peak condition." You
Hmm.
know, it's just understood. You go to a doctor when there's something wrong, and so the best case scenario for a physician or a doctor is someone that's not sick. And the worst case scenario, I guess, is if you're dead or just about to be
Close to
dead,
it.
right? But if that's like the best case scenario, well, in our world, that's like the 50% mark. And this whole other range of, what we're talking about, beingness, wellness, contentment, peace, wholeness, love, excitement, waking up with energy, and actually a willingness to do something. And so that's
Hmm.
how I would define, let's talk about that half. Let's call that mental wellness. And in a way, I'm making up a definition, and let's call this mental health. And it's not me defining it, but it's just I guess mainstream mental health institutions have actually made that the definition, so
Sure.
to create distinction.
Yeah, yeah. So, we might even talk about maybe like a -10 to 0 scale. That would be like mental illness to mental health. Zero is mental health. If you're just like,
I think mental
you
health would
don't
be five then, and
you
mental
don't have a
wellness.
mental illness,
Yeah.
like
Yes.
like a doctor, like you
Yes.
go to your therapist and they're like, I can't give you any code, I can't bill you for insurance because you don't fit any of these codes, right?
Yeah.
But of course that's not necessarily mental health just because you don't qualify for an anxiety disorder or whatever, or depression. So yeah, so maybe it's 0 to +10 plus, like, similarly in exercise, like, yeah, you go to the doctor and you're not unhealthy. That's good, but that's different than, yeah, I ran a 10K and I got a really good time, or I bench pressed 225 pounds today for 10 reps. Like,
Yeah.
there's a whole like range of positive qualities that we can develop in terms of health and fitness as well. uh, and so, yeah, that's kind of why I posed this weird question at the beginning of like, if you were going to train for mental health, or we might call it mental wellness, mental fitness, like what kind of things would you even do? How would you train for that? Now, I think most people don't think in those terms. They don't think it's possible to increase your mental health at all, or fitness or whatever.
It's not,
um,
yeah, because it's not defined. I mean, culture doesn't teach that this is
right,
a thing, right?
right. So I think people who do this sort of thing might start with like, well, I don't know, journaling or gratitude, or like, meditation, yoga, something. They might, this is where people would start. But with the tools we have in NLP, like, where could we go with this?
But and this is where things kind of get interesting, because with a lot of the clients that come to me, like, what did I say to one of the last consultations? The guy was ready to sign up as a client for me, but I ended up turning him down because I said, You don't need any coaching. Like, you're good. You have a beautiful life, right? Like, you literally have a beautiful life. You've got paying your bills. You've got health. You've got energy. You've got love. You've got everything's beautiful. But because the way you're living life, which actually is a state of beingness, he's already there, doesn't match to the paradigm of this sort of hustle, productivity, always doing, worldview that we sort of live in. He
What?
thinks he has an issue.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
totally.
I think that brings up an interesting point is that I think mental health and wellness can be two things because I think you could be, do you have a dis-ease or some kind of something wrong as opposed to, are you meeting your full capacity? So like I have a shoulder issue. So I have an imbalance, which sucks by the way. So I have a condition, a minor one, fortunately. So physically I have on a scale 1 to 10, my health is like let's say an 8 or 9. I'll say it's not bad, but my shoulders kind of bugs me here and there. Knees aren't as young as they used to be. But like as far as a wellness, like that's different because like I can bench a certain amount, I can squat and deadlift. I like weightlifting for people who don't know me. So within that range, I'm doing okay. If I go up against like Eddie Hall or like Half Thor Bjornsson, like it's not even close. Like I can barely lift their gym bag. So like it's different metrics. Like wellness, like health wise, like I'm fairly healthy, but like I have some nagging injuries. But as far as like wellness, like I'm making gains and strides. I'm like reaching more of my potential and getting stronger and healthier. So like those are different scales, I think.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
definitely. Yeah. So,
There's
uh,
definitely a balancing between sort of accepting where you're at
mhm.
and then also at the same time pushing yourself towards growth.
Yeah,
And I
right.
think, the fuel that is the difference, that makes the difference, is whether it's coming from a place of like self-judgment, self-criticism, guilt, comparison, or I should, like it's all that sort of depleting, sort of negative type emotions that sort of fueling your desire for growth, or if
Hmm.
it's more of a possibility of curiosity of, hey, I wonder what I can do if I just stay at this sort of consistent thing, right?
yeah,
It's a very different feeling.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the difference between coming from not good enough, I need to
Yeah,
do more because I'm not okay, versus, yeah, I'm fine just the way I am and I can improve. Exciting. Yeah. There's
yeah.
actually a famous quote by a Zen master, Shunru Suzuki Roshi. Each of you is perfect the way you are, and you could use a little improvement. And I
I
really like that
like that. Yeah.
because it really captures like, oh, you're perfect just the way you are. Oh, it's like
Can you
very
can you make that a
relaxing.
Facebook post, Duff, and so I can
Will
share it?
do. Will do.
Yes, please do. That's
Each of you
awesome.
can are perfect just the way you are, and you could use a little improvement.
Yeah,
Um, and yeah, the sense like if you can really get into that mindset, it's like if you can really step into I'm okay just the way I am. There's a sense of relief, satisfaction, peace, whatever you want to call it, joy, and it's a lovely state.
yeah,
And that's like a core state, right? That we get in core transformation, or states people experience in meditation or prayer and so on, or even just like watching a beautiful sunset. Nothing has to happen, right? There's just these
yeah,
beautiful, ordinary moments of that too. And it's okay to want to improve ourselves, I think. But yeah, it does come from a different place. And I
yeah.
think
Very different.
most of the time when we're trying to improve ourselves, there is this sense of like, it's not okay how it is. It's not good. I'm not good enough, or the situation's not good enough. Even activist movements like the world isn't good enough. It has to change now. There's just stress.
yeah,
And I think that's like, in some ways, that's our default these days. I don't know if that was always the case historically for human beings, but most people seem like they're coming from a chronic stress place most of the time, which is reflected in all the problems we have individually and collectively.
yeah,
Um, you know,
So what this triggers is, I think we'll all agree that someone that has anxiety, if someone, you have a client that has anxiety, part of their healing is learning to sit with what their body feels
Mm.
rather than run away from it, rather than try to, make it like force it to go away. Like, the only way out is sort of through, right? And this is something that I guess I want to make a statement here, and let's see if it holds, which part of the definition of, I guess, mental wellness or mental health is your ability to sit with your discomfort and your anxiety and not react to it,
Yeah.
right?
What's
To sit
most
with
what's
it.
trained in meditation, for instance.
Yeah, yeah, right.
Just being able to notice the sensation, the emotion, and not like have to immediately check your phone or stuff your face with food, or do something.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's a challenging skill, I think, for all of us. With training, you can get much better at that, though. Uh, like some of the beginning meditation instruction is often like sit, 15 minutes, and if you need to scratch, don't scratch. If
Mm.
you feel if you feel uncomfortable, see if you can just sit there with it. It's only 15 minutes. You're not going to die if you don't move, even if you're a little uncomfortable.
Well, the
And that's
world today
a
doesn't
powerful
really
training.
allow for that, eh? Like, not to go off on a tangent, but something that I guess I was sort of observing regarding social media today more so was, in the 20 minutes that I spent on Facebook today, I saw news of a coworker of mine that I used to work with. I've been talking to this guy for 10 years, was in a car accident, died,
Oh my gosh.
right? A divorce, a birth, and a very hilarious cat video.
I know, right? It's like an emotional roller coaster in
Oh
20
yeah,
minutes.
right. And it's like,
Was it all the same person, or was
sorry,
that'd be is that all the same
no,
person?
all on
Like,
Facebook,
like
all on Facebook,
oh,
right?
okay.
So, and I guess like as I'm sort of observing myself, I'm like, you know, this, scrolling, it's not giving me or anyone really that time to actually sit with anything,
Mm,
right?
yeah.
And I mean, as tragic as the first two bits of news are, if this was the 1980s, the conversation, everything, the world would have, like, your personal world would have stopped with just the first bit of news, and you would have sat there for a while and
Because there was
processed
nothing
that.
on TV or anything to
Yeah,
distract you.
exactly. And you would have been delivered this news in person
Yeah.
or over the phone, perhaps. And so you'd be with that person, right? And you would
Yeah.
process it. But now it's like, and it was just making me kind of be curious about what is this doing to our nervous system,
Yep.
because it's this, and we don't even realize it's happening.
Yeah.
I think we're becoming more, at least a lot of us, I think, are becoming more aware that our attention span is shorter, and that our ability to process things is not what it used to be. I think there's like some awareness of that, but I'm not sure we really know what to do with it, or we just like, well, that's unfortunate, but then we go back to what we do because that's how society's kind of built around us. We're used to it.
Right.
Um,
Well, this is another pro for meditation if we're going to
yeah,
train for mental wellness. Um, the funny thing, yeah, I actually have done a lot of meditation, and I was a uh, moderator for a hardcore meditation subreddit for a couple of years. I actually think one of the main benefits of meditation is just that you're not doing anything. It's like so low stimulation. Like meditation retreats are typically done like somewhere in the woods, away from the city, right? Like maybe an old Boy Scout camp or something, and and there's nothing going on, and they're often silent for even less stimulation. Besides like listening to maybe someone talk for an hour a day. Um, and even if you didn't meditate, if you just kind of sat in the woods for a week in silence, that alone would start to calm the nervous system. There's kind of this like co-regulation that happens with nature, just like sitting out and hearing birds chirp, and hearing the wind through the trees, and nothing's really happening. And so even if you didn't meditate, you'd start hitting states of peace and relaxation and so on. And then you add this like practice of paying attention and trying to be at peace with the sensations that are arising. The funny thing is, on a meditation retreat, usually what happens, what's most disturbing is the stuff that's just coming up in your own unconscious.
Mm-hmm.
The outside world is totally peaceful, nothing's happening, but inside there's all this like,
Yeah.
anxiety and fear and pain and
And
worry
that's
and
what you got
guilt
to
and
sit with.
sadness.
Yeah.
That's the thing. That's
Right,
exactly what you got to sit with.
right.
I also
And it
had
sort of
It's like
process
the
itself.
body knows how to heal itself.
Yeah.
If we just give it, if you just don't keep picking at that scab.
My knees would disagree with you. No, I
Yeah, I
had.
hear you. I hear you.
Well, I also have that. I think sitting with something is one way to do it. I also think that and I think hopefully people out there know what core transformation is because we seem to reference that quite a bit. But like some kind of practice, like it could be meditation, could be hypnosis or EFT or wholeness work or core transformation or fill in the blank, whatever. I think I think of those things as like alarm clocks or like warnings, like something's going on you should pay attention to. And I think you can process it by meditation. Sitting with it is probably, I think we don't do that as a species much at all. It's like, if there's pain, let's get the hell away from it. Well, that means something. It doesn't mean like you keep your hand on the stove. It means do something, you know, process it in whatever way is appropriate. But I think that like EFT or self-hypnosis or, I'll use core transformation. Well, you're saying essentially like, well, thanks for that warning sign. What is that about? Or how can how if we process it, if we get rid of the anxiety or the pain or discomfort, or we find out what that part or that activity or whatever is trying to get, then what do we do with it? Like when we satisfied that, okay, what do we notice? We engage with it and we process it. I think meditation, you can sit with it and that can work great. I think you can do things that are maybe a little more
There's
rapidly.
techniques now. Yeah, faster, better,
Right.
But then what do you do? There's still
more
process.
surgical.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's still a process. I think processing as opposed to drown it with more like Facebook feed or, ignore it, shove it down and just, do
Actually
something
face it.
to, yeah.
Yeah. I definitely agree. I think, and I've seen this in meditation communities, that people get very ideological, and I think the only way to do it is to meditate and to be present with it. And I think that's an important first step. But yeah, sometimes it's not the whole step. One example I give sometimes when I have a client who's like an advanced meditator and they haven't resolved their problem, whatever it is, I talk about the mindful mechanic. Imagine you bring your car into a mechanic who is a Buddhist practitioner, very mindful, and your car is making a certain noise and has a smell, and the mechanic, very gently, very peacefully opens the hood and observes it all, and then reports back and says, "Yes, your car is broken, but don't worry, that's okay. Everything decays. Just be present with it. That's okay." You'd be like, "Wait a minute, no, I actually want to fix my car too." Right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, that would still be a better mechanic than a mechanic who plugged his ears and was like, "Just think happy thoughts. My car's working. My car's working." Right? Which sometimes people do in spiritual communities or personal growth too. Just think positive. So you do need some mindfulness. You do need to pay attention to the sensations and what's happening, but then you can act on those too. You don't have to be passive. You don't have to just accept things as they are. You can actually do something about it.
Yeah. And adding to that, it's the ability of um, going deeper. Like, I think after watching the documentary "The Wisdom of Trauma" with by Dr. Gabor Mate, right? It gave me this paradigm and appreciation. It gave me words to something that in a way I kind of already was doing with my clients and of course even with myself, is that like when someone comes to me with depression or anxiety, like that's not what I treat or I work on, right?
Yeah.
I kind of, I'm like, your body is doing the anxiety for a reason. Behind every behavior is a positive intention. So there's a reason for that. And I actually had a very interesting experience during my trip. I think it's a perfect metaphor. My first 4 days, I was gone for a few weeks, which is why, very real listening. I know we promise every week. Well, this is my fault that this one's like a month later, right?
Nice job.
Yeah.
No
So
promises. Yeah.
yeah, no promises, right? So my first 4 or 5 days there, my blood pressure kept going up.
Hmm.
Right, it was like 180 over 116 at 120 at one point, right? And I'm starting to I feel chest pains, and I'm like, what's going on? All right. Um, so I ended up seeing a physician, and the doctors are actually better there. The first physician was basically like, uh, this is digestion related. It has nothing to do with your heart. Your heart's fine,
Hmm.
right? But I didn't believe him, right? Because what I remembered was something my family doctor who said to me is like, your parents are both on blood pressure medication, so it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, right? There's some hypnosis for you. So I'm like, okay, I'm not going to listen to you. I'm going to go to a cardiologist. So I go to see a cardiologist, and things are so much cheaper there. I mean, I got like an ECG done for like $10,
Whoa.
right? And a proper, like, it was insane, right? Maybe not $10, maybe it was 20, right? Um, but he did everything, and everything came out fine, right? So but he still gave me blood pressure medication just in case. And so I'm doing all these natural things because I don't want to go on meds because, it doesn't make sense. This is not like my blood pressure is normally high. At the end of all of it, there's a cousin of mine who's like, it kind of sounds like you have acid reflux because you're in a different country and the spices are different. So try this thing, which basically treats acid reflux. So I
Hmm.
drink this thing, and within 30 minutes, everything normalizes. Like everything goes away. And this is 4 days of me, like literally being in bed, of like, because I'm so tired, I'm so drained, I'm getting dizzy, I'm getting all of this, and all of that, even like the chest pains, all of that disappears. And then I like, say this to my cardiologist, and and he's like, well, okay, that makes sense because when you have, I guess, apparently acid reflux in this manner, the heart does what it's designed to do, and it works extra hard to try to
Hmm.
get rid of it,
Hmm.
right? Which is why your blood pressure was so up, and then you were having these weird symptoms and all of that.
So the
So
first doctor was right. It was digestive.
yeah, exactly. So for the first 4 days, I was treating the wrong thing,
Yeah, totally.
right? So that's the metaphor, and
Was
I just
biryani the
come up.
answer?
Sorry.
Was biryani really the answer to all your ails?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I didn't have biryani for like the first, you saw that still no biryani, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, it was just really, really interesting that, when clients come to me and they have, what they're considering mental health issues, that
Hmm.
the thing that they're actually experiencing might be the body's way to compensate for something else,
Hmm.
right? And that's what we got to kind of figure out. So add
All
that to
right.
the definition wherever it fits.
Yeah, where does it fit? Well, I think what we're coming on to here is a few themes. So we've got the theme of just being able to be present with your experience, not running away from your experience,
Mhm.
denying it, always escaping into media consumption or whatever, but being able to be present with your experience with discomfort to some level and meeting that. But then also solving the right problem, like really like going like what is the root cause of what's happening here if we're problem focused. And then there's some element of not just being problem focused, not just trying to identify why is this happening to me? What happened in childhood? What are all the symptoms? Like that isn't necessarily going to solve anything. It's really taking up I don't know a different tact here that also goes into the positive. Like core transformation very much goes into the positive. A lot of NLP methods are about bringing resources into the problem rather than just focusing on the problem. It's more about getting resources that then change or transform the problem. Uh, and then I think that we can even go beyond problems. Like right, we can train the mind, we can train the emotions, we can train in various ways. Just like we can train muscles, we can get better at this sort of stuff and get better at being peaceful, at being focused, at being fully alive, whatever it is, connected to your values. I think I think there's no limit to how much we can get good at those things, really. So it's just a matter of getting clear about what we're actually wanting, and a big part of that is not over focusing on what we don't want. We can start there. I don't want to be feeling this way. I don't want to be in this miserable job. I don't want to be overweight, whatever it is. But man, that's not really telling us where we want to end up. And so like really getting clear about what direction we want to head here. Maybe you don't know what the final destination is, but at least knowing, like if you're strength training, I want to get stronger. I want to get stronger at bench press and deadlift and squat or whatever.
Yeah.
Not just, I don't know, I don't want to be weak. I don't want to be, out of shape. It's like, okay, but what do you want instead? There's lots of different kinds of in shape.
Yeah.
Right. So what do you think of that?
Yeah. And to me, it's like, there's defining your values, but even like defining like how you want to show up, your characteristics, maybe your attributes, right? Stuff like something that has an action associated, like a beingness and an action associated, like something like, I want to be honest. Honesty is a value, and so I want to come across as an honest person, right? And then that there's an action, right, that's associated to that. Peaceful, right? There's an action associated to that. There's a beingness associated. Like maybe it has to hit all three of those things, but having that clarity, right, would definitely be a long way in that journey. Kind of like what you stand for.
Yeah, what you stand for, what kind of person you want to be, these sorts of things at your best. Like I often do that kind of exercise with clients. It's like, I've got this problem, I'm lacking confidence or whatever. It's like, okay, so what would it look like, even just from the outside? Like if you had a TV screen, or if you're watching your totally confident self, like what would that even be like? And at first people are like, oh, I don't know. It takes them a little while. Kind of like have to draw them into that. Like what's their body posture? What's their voice tone? Like, but then you get into like, what are their beliefs? What are their values? Like, what happens if someone questions their values or challenges them? Like, how do they respond? And you can start to really flesh this out. And then you can, practice stepping in and becoming that higher self. And what does that feel like from the inside? And it's such a simple exercise in a way, but it actually, I think, really taps into something. And then, how do we decide? How do we decide what goals we want to have or what values we want to have in life? To me, there's just like, sometimes there's just a feeling, right? Or just like an inkling of something. We have no idea why. It's like, I don't know why I'm interested in this thing that I'm interested in. Like for me, that was dance many years ago. It's like in my early 20s, I'm like, I don't know why I'm interested in dance. It doesn't make any sense to me. Like I was really stuck in my head. In retrospect, it makes a lot of sense to me. Yeah. So I was really stuck in my head. I was out of my emotions, my body. I was very socially anxious. And dance ended up like integrating a lot of emotions and getting me confident in my body and feeling good in my body. It helped me to do public speaking later and so on. Get me into flow states, trance states. I didn't know any of that. I just had this feeling like, I don't know. I look at people who are dancing and I'm like, looks fucking cool. I want to do that. But I can't do it. I'm frozen in fear. And so I was just drawn and I just started like trying to do it. I went out to bars and clubs. I didn't even drink alcohol. I was like, no alcohol. I'm not going to do that because that's going to be a crutch. And I want to learn how to do it without any drug. Not that there's anything inherently wrong with alcohol, but that's just what I wanted to do. Yep. And I just kept putting myself out in that situation. And most of the time I couldn't get myself to do it. I would just sit there and watch other people dance. And I'm like, dang it, failed again. Right. But eventually I started to break through and I'd have some fun. I'd be like, oh, that was really fun. Yes. Like I'm doing it. And I just felt myself come alive. So I think a lot of mental fitness is like following what that thing is. It doesn't make any sense logically, but that makes you come alive. And hypnosis and NLP were also that for me, and music and various things. But like, it doesn't always make sense.
I have a story.
Doing magic tricks was for me for a long time. Yeah.
Very nice.
David, you were saying?
Well, now I want to see a magic trick, but Now, a similar thought was that it doesn't always have to be. You don't always have to like resolve everything. And without going into too much detail, a friend of mine passed away several years ago unexpectedly. It was suicide, and so like that was really destroying. I mean, that if you ever go through that, which I hope no one else has to, obviously, but it's not a fun
Unfortunately.
experience, right? I mean,
No.
that's something that's notably difficult. And I was, on one hand, I was like, well, I'm a hypnotist. I know NLP. I could, I knew that I could do something about it. I could help alleviate the pain. And I was taking the training. I won't call it out. I think the intent was good, but basically, one of the things they said was like, well, feelings are just like thoughts. You could get rid of it if like. And there was a story about how someone's wife died, and they were able to like resolve it like that. And I had a strong recoil against that path. And I'm like, well, I probably could just tap down to zero, as many times as necessary. But it occurred to me that pain meant something to me, and that's probably my values and my own beliefs and my own baggage. But I don't want to have like my friend pass away and be like, oh, that was unfortunate. I didn't want it to be nothing. I wanted that pain, that processing was important to me to I can make more manageable, but I sure as hell didn't want it to like be nothing.
Right.
That would have felt wrong to me, and I had a strong aversion to like even attempting to like get rid of all that discomfort and pain because that was valuable to me. That experience meant something, and I found that even now it's a profoundly it was a painful but still a moving experience for me, and it meant and means something.
Yeah.
So my point for any viewers who are still with us, I don't think hypnosis has to make everything feel great.
Mm-hmm.
There's something to that experience of like, if you have a loss or a transition of some sort, as much I think you could use core transformation to resolve it, I don't think that means that you feel nothing. I mean, it means it transformed it to some level, and you can make that into something that's useful. It can be fertilizer for something deeper. Doesn't mean it's necessarily all rainbows and lollipops either. Like it can still be deep and kind of unpleasant, but useful.
Yeah, the point. I mean, I believe this. The point of life is not to be happy all the time,
Yeah.
right? And if I can, David, sort of use this. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah.
Sort of as an example, for people that are listening, especially if you're a parent, right? And coming from my sort of side, I guess, of the audience, because I get a lot of parents who bring their kids, right? And so what's happening is, if I can borrow your example, David, is you've gone through something,
Yeah.
you're feeling a sense of loss. The pain that you're feeling means something, and it means something good for you. And so you need to go through this experience as part of your healing journey, as part of you honoring this individual. Like, this is something it means for you. But now for the parent, perhaps, um, of a child, not talking about you anymore,
Yeah.
but a child that's going through something, it's the parent is unable. Remember how I was talking about your ability to sit with your anxiety and everything? It's too much for them to see their child in pain. And so then they bring me and they're like, something wrong with my kid. Help me. And I'm like, there's nothing wrong.
Yeah.
Just let them go through this, right? And yeah, you know what? It might take a number of years,
Right.
but for them to believe that, to feel pain because someone close to them died, and by suicide perhaps, that's is something that needs to be fixed, right? Like, now we're turning something, we're actually, we're messing with nature here,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I actually get a lot of these. I just got a call today, and unfortunately, I do have to intervene with this individual because 4 years ago, COVID happened, and everything that he experienced was because COVID happened. But he was taken to a therapist, and this therapist said, well, clearly he has a diagnosis, and now he has an identity of a diagnosis rather than him responding to something that's natural.
Right.
And there's drugs involved, and like medication and this and that, and and he switched between psychiatrists, and there's all this stuff which, again, it could have just been, um, all he needed was love and support, and someone to just meet him where he's at and say, yeah, this situation sucks.
Yeah.
Right.
And what you're feeling is absolutely valid. I feel it too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not try to
And
fix it.
yeah, yeah. So there's even a choice around what we decide to do in response to situations or feelings and so on in relation to our values. Getting back to the theme here of mental wellness or mental film fitness.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's not, yeah, like you're saying, Mohammed, it's not necessarily feeling happy all the time, feeling
No.
100% good all the time. Um, just like, in physical fitness or strength training, like it doesn't mean you never get sore or never get injured or something. Uh, elite athletes get injured all the time. And then, but they don't stop. They do rehab and they come back, and and they have ups and downs in their motivation and all that. Like that's all part of the journey. Um, yeah, and we have a choice about what we do with that stuff. Now, I think there's even choices to that are highly supportive or possibly transformative, but not getting rid of the feelings. It's not, the goal isn't getting rid of, but to maybe envelop them in a larger framework of compassion or love or something like that. And that might be the intervention itself, or it might be doing a creative act like dance or poetry or music or something like that, where we can express the feelings in a way that transmutes them into something beautiful. So there can be many different ways of working with things that are healthy and positive. And of course, the flip side, there's many unhealthy coping strategies that we have as human beings, like binge drinking or doing some
Right.
some recreational drugs that are very dangerous, or whatever else it might be, or even minor versions of just scrolling all day on your phone or whatever, checking out from life. And so there's lots of ways we can sort of try to cope with situations, and I think even our so-called bad habits have a positive intention of trying to cope well with the situation. Often they're trying to do something enjoyable. uh, when I think about that all the time, whenever I go out to some retail store and there's dance music playing, I'm like, this music was once playing in a club somewhere, maybe 40 years ago, but like people were partying, getting down to this music, and now it's playing at whatever retail store with this shitty job that people have, uh, probably in part to try to cope with the shitty job. you know
Yeah.
like maybe we could try to have some fun here, and people, it's not working, but like I think almost everything we do is an attempt to bring us happiness of some sort, like uh and try to reach a core state or try to reach a state of beingness or peace or love or joy or aliveness. And a lot of those strategies are not working, but I think pretty much everything we do is an attempt to do that or lead to mental health.
So, would this be a definitive statement then, where if there was a goal of mental fitness and wellness, you'll know you've arrived because you're giving yourself permission to feel, right? Like the energy, the emotional energy is flowing, both
Mm-hmm.
love, grief, you know, strength, pain, right? Like, and you're okay, and you're able to sit with it, and you're able for it to move, right? And in both cases, you're not chasing the high of the good all the time, but you're also not running away from the pain. You're processing. It's moving, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, because it seems to be like that's the theme that's coming up. Like we're talking about feeling, we're talking about
Mm-hmm.
sitting with it, we're talking about beingness and
Yeah.
oneness, right? And then how people will use coping mechanisms to try to numb themselves,
Oh, right.
which is obviously not the definition of mental health or wellness or fitness or whatever we're calling it.
I think it depends. I think there are people that I think for me that resonates. I think that people would say, for me, mental health means I can take whatever life dishes out and chew it up for breakfast and spit it out. That if everything blew up in my face, I could survive.
Mm.
So I think it does depend. I mean, I wondered that. I guess I'll just give a shout out because he's a famous person. Like David Goggins is someone who I have a bit of a I'm fascinated with, and I don't necessarily agree or disagree with them because I think there are people that mentality that are just like they're driven that what it means to me to be well is to endure. Period. If every bone in my body is broken, mental health means I can pick myself up and keep going. And I think I'm torn because on one hand I can admire that, and I think that having that resilience and the ability to just kind of take whatever life gives you and just endure. Like there's something I think kind of admirable about that. I'm not sure it's the healthiest way is like a carte blanche either, and it's not necessarily how I would choose to run my life. But I don't want to judge people who might because I think there's some strange value to that. So I do have some
Mm-hmm.
strange admiration, but I do kind of wonder if you gave someone like that, a David Goggins type or a Navy SEAL or an ultra marathoner, if you gave them like the core state, just for one example, of what you'd get from that and like applied that, how would that change what they did? If you knew you could, endure whatever you could endure, you know it in your heart of hearts. Well, how does that change how you live life and how you feel about things? Do those people still want peace and oneness and wholeness, or do they want something different? I don't really know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know how to test that. Like, I have a belief statement, except I don't know, like, if it's true or not, because again, it's just a personal belief statement. But my that belief statement is, I think all overachievers are actually, like they're just responding to their trauma, their anxieties,
Yeah,
like that's what it is.
Yeah, I mean
Like,
Goggins is explicit with that. Yeah, he
yeah,
had horrible
he's
childhood and
I don't
yes,
was
know much
treated
about.
terribly, and
I read
yeah,
Living with the Seal, which
yeah,
I didn't know it was David Goggins at the time,
yeah,
right? Yeah, but that's where I'm kind of like, you know, I think if I'm understanding you correctly, David, is if they were healed,
yeah,
would they still, have such a desire to always be performing,
yeah.
right? If they
who
get a
knows?
taste of a core state, would they drop the need to perform and do and be like, you know what, this is a great place to be?
Yeah, I think there'd probably be at least some lessening, right? Like
Yeah,
going all out all the time is usually just yeah, it's not necessarily healthy. On the other hand, like David Goggins, he's not like shooting up heroin every day. Like there's other ways to deal with a terrible childhood that he's not doing.
Yeah.
He's running and he's doing push-ups and he's really fit. So there's health in that regard, but he also sometimes pushes too hard and hurts himself and so on and like so there's I think if my theory, but I don't know, is something like that, someone who's that driven, if they had inner peace, they'd probably be at least somewhat less driven. Maybe not 0% driven and just sitting around very peaceful all the time, but at least being like, well, that elite level requires sacrifice, and I don't want to sacrifice anymore. Like I want peace and I want to run, so I'll run 20 miles instead of 100 miles, and I can do that without damaging myself or whatever. So I think there probably is something like that. Uh, but I don't know. I'm just guessing here. But that
Yeah,
just seems like a more balanced approach.
maybe.
Yeah. I guess I want to circle back around something you were saying, Mohammed, before all this though. I do think there's something in general for humans around mental fitness and wellness where you can acknowledge the truth of what you're feeling and be with it, maybe meet it with love and compassion, something like that. And then you can choose, you don't have to do anything to change it, but maybe choose whether you want to do something to change it or not. I think that is part of it, the equation. And
mm-hmm.
I also want to float a challenging wrench into the mix here, which is I think that's on the negative side, the negative 10 to 0. I think there's also something about stretching ourselves into the positive, like how good can we stand it, kind of thing. That often we run into some limit of it could be feeling, it could be income, it could be success, where we're like, no, I don't deserve that, and we stop ourselves, or we kind of come back to a baseline. Uh, so I think there's something about like trying to explore the very positive, and which is not out of a sense of like not good enough and trauma and so on, but like, wow, I wonder, like, this is already really good, whatever it is, my relationship, my fitness level, my you know, whatever, my career is already really good. I wonder, does it get even better? You know, like, that's kind of an interesting way to explore. And I think there often are limits there. Like, like I've noticed in myself after I did lots of core transformation, I had access to these states of like peace and so on, more or less. Like I sit down to meditate and my mind would just calm down on its own.
Yeah.
And I at first I'm like, yeah, but that is that okay? It's kind of like, what am I doing? I'm just sitting here feeling good. Like that's not all right. You know, like I should be productive, doing something, right? I mean, it has this funny little barrier, and I still sometimes run into that. It's like, I scroll on my phone or on the computer instead of sitting and just being and feeling good when I have access to these states.
Yeah.
I'm like, from the outside, I'm like, what am I doing? Like I spent all of these years working to have peace and feel good when I felt terrible for so many years. Now I have it. I'm like, I'll just scroll Facebook or Instagram instead.
The guy that owns the gym I go to in Austin, if you see this, Austin from Art and Fitness, there's a shout out. He made a good point because I tend to downplay my accomplishments. Just for whatever reason, I've always been modest since I was a kid. But he's like, well, no, like this is a good goal you've hit. You've hit a good benchmark. Like he's like brag about it. Like accept it, acknowledge you did something great. Feel good about it, then move on. Because I mean, you don't have to go, oh, it's nothing big deal. Like it's a personal comp, whatever it is. It doesn't matter what it is. Acknowledge, like, yeah, you've done something, you've achieved something. Don't bask in it forever. Don't like let that don't stall out and never live your life. Acknowledge it, feel good about it. Like, why not? If you've done, 1,000 core transformation sessions and you can kind of access core states, and that's great. If you can bench press 350, which I can't, but if you can, whatever, if you can run a mile, if you can do a push up, if that's a milestone, then acknowledge it.
Right. I mean, the funny thing is, back in the day, I'd spend all day long being anxious and depressed, and I didn't have a problem with that. I was just like, oh, this is, that's fine.
Yeah. I think
wake up in the morning, feel bad for no reason. It's like, well, I just feel bad. But if I wake up in the morning, feel good for no reason, it's like, is that all right? I mean, so many people in the world are suffering right now.
Yeah.
Like, is it okay for me to just be happy for hours and hours at a time?
Yeah. But I think that's, yes. And I think it's, because why? Because that allows you to do more, or even just because it feels good. Like that's your body and mind telling you something. And then from that place, acknowledge it, feel good about it. Like what do you do next with it?
Right.
Maybe what you do next is you feel good for an hour, because why not? And so I think there's value in acknowledging and feeling good about what you accomplish, and you're rewarding your system for doing something good, and then what do you want to do next with it?
Yeah.
And if all you want to do is just feel good for a day, I mean, hell, go for it. Life's short enough as it is, and most of us don't let ourselves feel good and acknowledge that life can be great.
Right.
And how much more, can you bring to light the world if you just enjoy that and then walk out in the world and become a beacon of light for people? And people need that.
Yeah.
Life can get pretty grim sometimes.
Right.
It's a line I say to a lot of my clients, especially the executive ones, like, it's okay to step into your greatness and learn, to be able to be okay with that. Right. Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a good line.
Yeah. Well, we've been talking for 59 minutes, so maybe that's a good place to wrap it up. But go out and step into your greatness, everybody. Feel good for no reason. Become more mentally well and fit. Maybe physically too. Maybe emotionally. Maybe well and fit in every area. Why not?
Yeah.
Yeah, see how good you can stand it.
And the more you watch these episodes, the more well and fit you'll become. There's some hypnotic language patterns for you.
Very nice. Subtle. Very, very,
very subtle. People say when you listen, you really feel good. Okay, so
like and right?
What's that?
Like and subscribe.
Life. Oh, like,
Right.
subscribe, comment,
You're not a
smash that
YouTuber.
notification button.
Yeah.
Yes.
Unless you say that, right?
You're supposed to say that. Yeah.
Yeah, you're
Yeah.
supposed to say that.
For
Supposed to
works
say
in
that.
progress.
All right.
Here.
Now we did what we were supposed to do. So we can
Yeah.
wrap up. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Good night.